For the sake of this interview, state your name and where you live.
My name is Father John Dolan. I live in Brewster, Massachusetts.
Thank you. This is the Witness to War project. How did you end up on Cape Cod?
I have been a priest for over 40 years, and the religious community that I belong to assigned me to this parish, Our Lady of the Cape in Brewster, and I've been here for over 15 years now. This is how I ended up on Cape Cod. My last parish was in Texas, so but I'm from the Boston area originally, so it's nice to be back closer to home.
Okay. What made you want to do this interview?
Well, I've known Savannah for a long time here in the parish, and she called me and asked me if I'd be willing to talk about my experience as a Air Force veteran, a Vietnam veteran.
Right. How did you end up in the military?
How did I end up in the military? This was 1967, and there was a draft going on at the time. I was being drafted into the Army, and I decided that I would enlist in the Air Force. I had had 2 years of college, and I was not in college at the time, so I decided to enlist in the Air Force. Yeah.
Okay. How did your parents react to you going?
My parents were very proud of the fact that I was willing to serve my country, and they were very supportive. They were very worried about me too, being it was at the height of the Vietnam War, and but they were very supportive.
Okay. And would you explain your role in the Air Force?
Okay. Most of my jobs were I had desk jobs mostly. I worked in personnel. I had a job in working on a flight line, but again, disaster control. I always had desk jobs, and which was, personnel. It was taking care of records. When I was in Vietnam, I was in charge of getting people's flights back to the United States. So I was very popular. People were trying to influence me, helping them get out as soon as possible.
Okay. And describe your experience in the war/military.
Okay. I was on a very large base in Vietnam. It was called Cam Ranh Bay. It was one of the areas where a lot of planes landed when you first came to Vietnam. That's where you started your time there. There were probably, I don't know, maybe 15,000 people on this base, so it was very large. And the Air Force was there, the Army was there, the Navy was there, so it was a huge base. And I did not leave that base for one whole year, except for 1 week rather, of R&R. And we were allowed to go either to Hawaii, Australia, or Hong Kong for 1 week during that year. So I was right on that base for 51 weeks. It was an experience of there was a lot going on around us. Maybe once or twice a month, they would shell the base. The Viet Cong were trying to knock out the flight line, and so once or twice a month we would have to take cover. We lived in little huts called a hutch. We're talking 50 years ago, and a hooch. There we go. And it was surrounded by sandbags, and oftentimes in the middle of the night, someone would holler "incoming," and rockets would be coming into the base, and you would put on your flak vest and your helmet, and you'd get under your bed, trying not to get hit by shrapnel. I was very fortunate in that I was never wounded. I was, they're working that for that whole year there on that base, and it made some very good friends during that year. In fact, I still hear from some of my friends that got in touch with me through Facebook, especially in the last couple of years. So it's it's nice to still stay connected.
And what was the most interesting place you went to when you were in the military?
The most interesting place. I enjoyed after I left Vietnam in 1970, my last year was in South Dakota, in Rapid City. And it was very near Mount Rushmore, the Black Hills, and it was a very nice base, and just being back from Vietnam, it was a really good experience to be out there, see a different part of the country. I'd never seen South Dakota, and it's very different from New England, and so I enjoyed my last year probably the best.
Okay, and describe the happiest moment.
Happiest moment. Well, I became very friendly with a chaplain in Vietnam, and he knew that I was interested in becoming a priest, and he encouraged me. And he gave me a little part-time job. I played the organ for the church services there on the base, and my best friend was taking instructions to become Catholic. His wife was Catholic. And while we were there in Vietnam, I sponsored him and ended up being his godfather. He was baptized there on the base. So it was, that part of it was a really good experience for me. And I still hear from him. He's retired now. He's a grandfather and living in Pennsylvania. And he and his wife are supposed to be coming to the Cape next year to visit. So that'll be, he sent me a picture recently of the two of us, and from 50 years ago. So it's been nice to be able to still be connected with friends from a long time ago. So, and I always feel that some of the roots of my vocation came from my Vietnam experience of, I wanted to do something positive with my life, and I saw what the chaplains were doing. I really felt that I wanted to do, and once I got out of the Air Force, I went right into the seminary. So.
Yeah. And describe the darkest moment from the war.
Some of the darkest moments were, I would say, being away from family was difficult. Christmas, I was just thinking, it was 50 years ago this month that I was there in Vietnam, and being away from family at Christmas is probably the saddest Christmas I've ever had. I recently, I sing with the Chatham Chorale here on the Cape, and we just did a performance with the Cape Cod Symphony, and they did a lot of the USO kind of flashbacks to when, in fact, when I was there, we had a USO show come through, like Bob Hope, and so Christmas was a difficult time, being away from family. So I would say that was one of the darkest things. And also, I did lose a couple of friends who, one in particular, who he actually died of an overdose. And so that was really one of the saddest things that I experienced there. I was not involved in combat, so I didn't see that part of the war, but I saw some of the effects of the war.
And describe how you feel when you hear the word Vietnam.
Vietnam. I think it was such an unpopular war, and kind of waste. It seems like it wasn't a war that we won really, and I kept hearing about the protests that were going on in the United States when we were over there, and we came back, and I didn't talk about it very much when I got back. It wasn't, we didn't come back to a big welcome. There weren't parades, and there wasn't this, real sense of, that we did something really good. But there was a sadness there, and just, it seemed like, why were we there? Should we have been there? To me, it seemed like it was somewhat of a waste of time, waste of men. You think about the many men who died there, and for what reason. When I go to Washington now, I sometimes go down to the wall there, and I know people whose names are there, and again, it seems like such a shame. I'm glad that they finally did something like the wall, but it was really kind of a dark time in our history. Yeah.
And describe how your life has changed since the war.
Well, certainly my life changed a great deal from being in the military to entering the seminary, and then I had to make up. I was like 4 or 5 years older than my classmates, and so I had to make up some courses, and so it took me a little longer. So I got out of the service in 1971, and I was ordained to the priesthood in 1979, and so I've spent 40 years now, as a priest. I've worked in, many different places. We are a missionary order, so I've moved around a great deal. I've been in Connecticut. I spent 4 years in a parish in England. I've been in Texas. I've been, Connecticut, Massachusetts. So I've really been working in many different, parishes, not just in one diocese. So I've moved around a great deal, and I've found a lot of fulfillment in my in ministry. And I thought at one time of possibly going back into the military as a chaplain, and but that never happened. But it did cross my mind that it would have been nice to serve, my country that way too, and the military, because I was very impressed with the chaplains that I experienced, and they certainly had a big, effect in my life, influence. Yeah.
And how did you feel once the war was over?
Over. Yeah. Again, I was just very grateful that it was over, and I thought it should have been over a lot sooner. And grateful that other young men didn't have to, they did away with the draft eventually, and just they brought troops home, and was just very grateful that it was behind us. It was not an easy period in our the history of our country. So I was just grateful that it was over. Felt very badly for those who were affected by the war a great deal, and I think those who were involved in combat were certainly much more affected than I was, and I saw some of the difficulties that they experienced, and so but I was just very grateful that it was over. Excuse me. I have a priest friend who is a chaplain in Veterans Hospital, and so he's experienced a lot of the things that happen to young men coming back, and he actually went back to Vietnam a few years ago, and so he had the opportunity to go back to where he had been stationed. He was in the Army, so he saw a lot of combat. So, but I was very fortunate in where I served and how I was able to come out of the war.
Okay. And what would you say to someone who wanted to go into the military now?
In the military now. Well, my grandnephew just graduated from high school last year, and he enlisted in the Air Force right after high school. And I was very pleased that he wanted to do this, and so I was able to encourage him, and I think great opportunity for him, for his education, and also to serve his country. And I'm pleased that he's been willing to do this. he had thought first about going right into college, and then decided that it would be best for him to go in the military first. And he's doing college courses now, and when he gets out of the Air Force, I'm sure he will continue with his education then. But I think he's maturing. I just saw him a couple of months ago, and I think he's finding his way, and so I'm very happy that he is doing this. And I think the military has changed quite a bit too. From I saw he and I went through the same Lackland Air Force Base basic training, and what I went through and what he went through is very different now. And I mean, we lived in open barracks, and they have their own rooms now, or two-door room, and it looks more like a hotel than it does a barrack. So, but I think he has good opportunity, and he's taking advantage of that. So I encourage people to, especially if they want to. It's a real maturing situation. So.
And describe your hardships while on base.
Hardship while on base. Well, in Vietnam, I think the hardships were you worked 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. You had Sundays off. But in a way you didn't have much else to do but work. So, and I don't know if we had real hardships. I mean, we were taken care of. You had 3 meals a day. You did have some free time, but I wouldn't say. I would say they called it an isolated tour. So being isolated, being not having the freedom to go wherever you want. When I think about, I lived like within 1 square mile for a whole year, never moved very far at all, or other than that 1 week of R&R. So, but I felt I made the best of it, the most of it, and you made good friends because of your situation. You didn't have any family around, and so I think we made our own fun, I didn't think it was a real hardship for me. Mm.
And describe your emotions during the war.
During the war, hardship. My emotions during the war. I would say that there were times when I had some fear. There were times when I was depressed. I would say having to go through this. Why am I here? But for the most part, I'm a pretty positive person. So I stayed very positive through the whole situation. Made the most of it. Made the best of it. And I felt, again, having good friends was a big help. We really supported one another, and it got you through it. My best friend, who I was sponsor for, his wife had a baby while we were there, and so I really felt sorry for him that he wasn't able to be there with his wife when they had their first child. But he went to Hawaii for his R&R, and his wife and baby were able to meet him there, and so we were able to see his little girl for the first time in Vietnam. Then he had to come back to Vietnam for 2 more months, so that was difficult. But I would say we really supported one another and made very good friends. Obviously, 50 years later, I'm still in touch with a few of them.
What effects did the military have on your daily life?
On my daily life, well, it was very regimented. You certainly had a very regimented schedule. and you woke up in the morning. You didn't have to decide what you were going to wear. You put your uniform on. The 3 meals. You went to the mess hall. You went to your job. There were times when we had to. You had your regular job, and then you were also an augmentee, which meant there were times when you had to go out, and the perimeter of the base had to be. You had to be guard on guard duty. So, but that was very rare. It was only a few times that had to be done. So, but I would say, you worked hard. You did your job, and just but very very regimented, and discipline was important. If you didn't do what you were supposed to be doing, you would be reprimanded.
Describe how it felt to return home.
It was great to return home, and it was just to reconnect with family. Who I can remember my parents had a picture of me, and they blew it up poster size and put it on the door with a big welcome home sign, it was terrific to get back home and to just reconnect with people. And I remember I had a couple of weeks to spend with family before then. I had one more year to serve, and that was when I was sent out to South Dakota for my last year of service. But it was just it was great. I always remember some of the food that I missed. It was great to come home to, like, we never had, it was like powdered milk probably. So milk never tasted, as good as it did when I got home, and ice cream. There were things that, and fresh vegetables. To this day, I hate lima beans because that's what we had an awful lot of. And so it was nice to get back to, real food and fresh food, because you're limited what they had there. Yeah.
Did you enjoy your time in the military?
For the most part, I did. Yeah, I really felt it was a very good experience for me. I was able to pay for my education after the military through the GI Bill, and so that was a big help. I ended up with no debt. I didn't have to take out loans or anything for my education, so that was a big plus. I feel I matured in those 4 years in the military too, and then I had good direction in life too. I knew what I wanted to do from that, and I had not been a great student before, and so it really helped me to. I had a goal. I had what I wanted to do, and I became a much better student after that experience than I had been, before.
How did your friends react when you returned?
How did my friends react? Let's see. Some of my friends were, in college, and Vietnam was really, something that was protested in colleges, and so, some of them, weren't that supportive. But my real friends, and in fact, it's funny. I just had a call from. This afternoon from one of my friends who was in Vietnam at the same time I was. We had been in school together, and so he's always been very supportive. So it all depends on what their view was of the war, but some of them thought that we shouldn't have been there. So that made it a little difficult.
And can you elaborate on why the Vietnam War was so protested?
I think they felt that we shouldn't have been there, that we were trying. Well, it was it was a very unpopular war because they felt we were involved in a country that we shouldn't have been in. And yet, you know, they were saying that communism was going to take over South Vietnam, and that shouldn't happen. But it was a bad situation for years. The French had their problems there when they were there, and so it just was, you know, not well supported, and they felt that we should have gotten out of there a lot, you know, that we a long time ago, and that we shouldn't have been that involved.
How did you react to people talking about Vietnam?
I probably didn't always tell people that I had been in Vietnam. I would say, you know, where it wasn't popular, I would say I didn't share that part of, you know, who I was. So I rarely talked about, you know, my experience there. Later on, I shared more later when kind of got distance from it. But at the time, you know, I would say I didn't talk about it because it was, you know, I went right into college then, so I was with a lot of college kids who, you know, they were, you know, 4 or 5 years younger, but they, you know, weren't involved with what I was. So.
How would you react if someone told you to go back into the military now?
Oh, well, certainly yeah, the military was a pretty good experience for me. So if I were younger, in fact, sometimes I said to myself, well, if I had stayed in, I could have retired, you know, after 20 years and then gone on to a second career. But yeah, the military was a good experience for me. So I would, if I were younger, and yeah, that's why I encouraged my grandnephew to go in, because it really was a pretty good way of life for me for a while, but not enough for me to do 20 years. So, yeah.
If you could go back, would you choose a different military branch? Why?
I'm not sure. Probably not. I really liked the Air Force, but no, I would kind of have a soft spot, you know, for the my heart for the Air Force. So, yeah. My brother-in-law is a Navy man, so he's always telling me that the Navy's better, but.
And do you wish you were in combat during the military?
No, not at all, no. I was very grateful that I did not. I mean, I had we all had an M16, and I was very grateful that I never had to use it. Yeah, that would have been very difficult, yeah. So, I was very glad to be in a support role, and yeah, it would have been difficult for me to, you know, to have to do that. But if it had occurred, I probably would have had to. But I'm just grateful that I didn't have to.
Thank you for your participation.
You're welcome. Thank you for your questions, and yeah, it's very thought-provoking. It brings me back, you know, something that I experienced 50 years ago and really haven't talked about very much, you know, since then. So yeah, but you had some very good questions, got me thinking. So, all right.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. What can I say in 30 seconds? So, but yeah, the military is, you know, I think a very good way of life, and I think it's gotten better over the years, and it's a lot of support for the military these days. So, yeah, I would say it's certainly an important part of our country. And we think about those who defend us, those who enable us to live in freedom. So it's a very important thing.
Well, thank you again.
All right. And good luck with your project.